Hi everyone, in today's video we are building a developer portfolio website using just React and Tailwind CSS for styling. We are going to have a bio section in the top right corner that's going to include a little bit of information about yourself as well as social links, for example, LinkedIn, GitHub, followed by this skills section, of course, to showcase all the languages and frameworks you know, as well as the projects that you have built in the past. All of this also link would be added as a link, so you can link it out to your projects. Then we have a contact form and a simple footer. Also, the way we'll build this, it would be mobile responsive. So that's how it looks like on the mobile. And the tutorial, I made it as beginner friendly as possible, so everyone should be able to follow along. And let's get started. I'm excited to share this portfolio and see how you build it or how you customize it. Let me know in the comments. Let's create the project, and we'll create a React project, but we'll use Vite for that. Think of Vite as a build tool that helps us bundle the code, and also it provides some optimization so we can run the code faster. And we'll use this command, but we'll just update. Instead of Vue, we'll set it to React, and Vue just supports other frameworks. That's why we are seeing Vue. Okay, so I'm in my terminal in the folder where I want to create the application. So I'm gonna change this default name. I'm going to say my dev portfolio, and also the template as I mentioned. That would be React, and we press enter. That was pretty quick. Once that's ready, let's cd into the folder as it's shown here. We run npm install. This would install all the dependencies that is needed to run the project. It is done with the installations. We are going to open the project in the IDE of your choice. I'm using VS Code, and I'll run the command code dot. If you don't have this command set up, you can also just open up VS Code, go in the file, and then open and select the folder that was just created. And before we run the application, we are also going to install Tailwind CSS in our project. And what Tailwind does is that it basically provides utility classes. So you have to write almost no to minimal CSS like styling. And yes, we are going to take a look. So in the guide here, they have this project setup, which we already did. And the next step is to install the dependencies and then initialize Tailwind. So let's first in the terminal inside the IDE install those, and copying this initialization command. All right, we can see that tailwind.config.js file has been created, that where we store the configurations for Tailwind. And the third step here is to configure the path for this files that we have, and it depends the path on which framework we're using. So since we have Vite, we do the source folder. That's where our code goes, and index.html file. All right, let's save this. We also need to make sure that all the Tailwind directives are coming in and imported into our main style file, which would be index.css. And that is inside source folder. I'm going to open up this, and at the top of the file is where I'll do the imports. Let's save that, and finally let's run the application. So command for this is npm run dev. So if I do this right here, it would start on localhost, port is 5173. Let's open it up, and we see this basic application, and the code for this one is coming from app.jsx. So if we want to take a quick look, what we have here is we have an icon inside assets folder, then we have a CSS file. That one is for app.jsx. We also have a public folder where usually your public assets, for example, images, go, and then node modules are all the dependencies that have been installed in the first part of our project setup. We can go to app.jsx, make some modifications, and see how our application gets updated. Going to open the app in the browser on the side so we can see, and in the app file I'll remove the state that we have for the count and also all the other code. So if we save the changes now, it would automatically reload, and we're just going to see with text, with plus React. So same thing for if we wanted to change the text, we could update that as well and see the changes instantly. Now, if you notice, this text is always centered, and it also has a large font. That means that styling is coming from somewhere. And let's also remove that default styling. I suspect that is in the index.css. We have this for the bodies where it's like minimum height, width is set, as well as the display flex. And what we're going to do before we start writing our own styling is remove this. Only attribute that I'm going to leave here would be the minimum height, and we'll come back to this main CSS file. But for now, let's do styling for this app component only, and a container here, and that would be using a class name container. So the styling, you can see I have this is showing me I have a Tailwind extension installed on the VS Code. It's helpful if you don't remember what that class name stands for. You can also hover over and it's going to show. So this container has this 6 rules. So the width is set to 100% by default, and then on different screen sizes, its width is going to change. So that's a good practice since we don't have everything to be full width. And we can also check those classes or different stylings on the Tailwind documentation. So we can see here what are the breakpoints that are defined and what are the width. And the container is applied just by adding a class name and container. Also, there's an MX auto, which sets margin to auto, so it would be automatically centered. Let's save that. And if you want to take a look at the other stylings, how to apply, there's like a long list on how to change from starting from the background to the text, also the different flex styles, and these are all we're going to be using, but that's the documentation. All right, so now if we were to go back to our project, you can see that the other stylings have been removed, and if we go to elements, then we can select this container and we can see the width of it right now. So the max width is set to this value, so it does not ever go more wide than this. If we were to change the screen size, then this would also get updated. Our screen size is smaller now, so the width of the container accordingly gets smaller. Now I want to change the width size. I want to set it to the medium, so I'll do that by updating this. And let's add the 2 columns, one on the left side, that would be smaller one, and on the right side is where we're gonna have more information, so we're gonna make that bigger. So to add the 2 columns, we're gonna select the display type grid, and let's create those 2 divs for the 2 columns. So this would be, I'm just gonna write column 1, which I'm gonna delete this hard-coded text. This is just for us to see, and column 2. Let's also add class names border just to see what space they are holding. So border and border, we can do red 500. Same thing here. I'm just gonna do different color border. Let's just do black. Okay, so by default, we can see the setup is one column is on top of the other column. Let's just change that and define how many columns we want to have per row. So if we set to 2, we're going to see that we have 2 columns now, and these two equally, the children of this container class equally share the width of the column. So the full row is divided by 2. So we can have different variations. We can also have 3, and what happens in this case is, unless we specify, each one of the columns will take. So here is the space for the third one, but what we're gonna do instead is we're gonna make the second column take up the 2 space, so it would be 2/3 of the whole thing. And to do that, we go now on the column container itself, and we define span, so how much of the value from the whole thing it should take. All right, so that's the perfect distribution. Let's add some gap in between. We can do that by setting margins or also setting a gap on the parent container. Great. Now, if we make this smaller screen, we can also see that we still have the same 2 columns, but for smaller screens, the text here on the first column would be hard to read. So ideally, we would have column 1 on the full width and column 2 on the separate row. Okay, to do that, we can set grid column 1 by default, and then on medium, starting from medium to larger screens. So that's how we add breakpoints on the Tailwind. We would have this current setup as we have right now. All right, that looks great. Let's also add some padding to the whole thing. So by default on the mobile, it would be smaller padding, and on larger screens, larger padding. So yeah, Tailwind follows like mobile first philosophy. So we define classes for mobile on the default, and then add breakpoints. So if we hover over, we can see that the breakpoint for medium is starting 768, but if we wanted something smaller, there's also small, or for larger screens only, that would be LG. And I'm gonna revert this back to medium. As we saw while adding the border colors to these elements, that Tailwind comes with a set of this defined colors, and you can browse the list here where we have a text color, and colors apply for the background color. So if I were to go back in here now and change the text that to Amber 600, this would look like this, and the darker you want, the higher the value it gets. But if you wanted to use a specific list of colors and add like your custom names to it, then that can be done by customizing the theme part, and that would be inside tailwind.config.js. So we're going to take a look how to do that, because we're only going to use like few theme colors. So let's define that, and this is where we're going to define, but first we are going to define the values for those colors in index.css. Some color, we can do that right now if we copy the hash of it and do something like this. But then, and this is like the blue, it will get updated, but then we would have to remember to use the same hash every single time. So then that would be pretty confusing. That's why I like to define variables in index.css. At the root, I will paste the values that I came up with. So the variable name in this case would be primary, and this would be the value. So this is the value for the color. It's in HSL format. So if you wanted to change any of the values that I have, you can always go to HSL color picker. If you look it up, paste this name, it would be different kinds of websites for this. And this is one example that I found. So you can change the colors, and once you have that, you'll copy this value here and paste it in here. So primary, I named it like a primary main color. Then we have primary foreground. This would be the color for the text that applies for a component that has that primary background. Then we have a secondary color. Background is what we're going to use to set the background. We also have a color for the border, input, ring, and then we have radius. So these are just constant definitions. This hasn't been applied yet anywhere. And I'll show you how we can apply if we go to the body, for example, and set background color. We need HSL function, then we add variable and background. So now background color would be set to this value here. If we save this, go back to our application, we can see that it has updated. The difference is very subtle, but if I do this, it's like white, and then it has this more gray tint to it. Now let's go to Tailwind configuration so that we can use these variables that we define inside our classes, Tailwind classes. And here we're going to extend the colors. And for the border, we're going to set border just like we did in the body example. So I'll do the same thing for all the values. And before I continue, if you want to examine how this is taking effect, let's say if we were to update this and set it to border instead, you would have this color right here that is defined in here. All right, let's continue. So we have ring, then we have a background, foreground. Now we have a primary, and this can be two types. There's a default where we are gonna just use the primary value. And there's foreground. And we have a secondary. If we go back here, now we have also colors for background, foreground, primary, and secondary. So if I change this to the background, we shouldn't be able to see it because the background is anymore. The background is also set to the same value. Code for this section right here, which would be a little bio. So for each of the section, I think it would be a good practice to create a separate folder where we're going to store the sections. And I'll do new folder sections, and sections would just be like a React components. So for each component, let's create a new file. I'll do bo.jsx, creating like a basic functional component, constant bio that equals to, and then return. Let's do empty fragment, the text, and at the end export default name of the component. If we save this, if we go back to app.jsx, now to be able to see this on our page, we can import first name of the component from sections folder. Oh, it's in the same. And let's remove this styling and border. We don't need that anymore. This was for demonstration and explaining purposes. So also the text. And I'll create a component here. I'll call the component, and we are not passing any props. It doesn't take any props. So if we do that, we can see that it shows up here. Now let's change some styling. So we're gonna make it into a div. Actually, let's use a section HTML tag. Then class names, background, I'm gonna set it to white. Text alignment, let's set that to the left. Rounded corners, Excel, so it would be like really rounded. Add some padding. On larger screens, it would be a bigger padding and some shadow as well. So if we save that, we can see this styling show up, and it kind of looks like a card. Let's remove this hard-coded text. So then we can add a header here displaying the name, and then I think some subtitle, more explanation, description would be here. So I'm a senior full stack engineer. Kind of like an intro, and that is a very large text. Also, you can see on this medium size of the screen, it's too big for the space. So let's change the stylings for that. We're gonna set text to large by default, and then on medium screens, let's do text to Excel. Font bold, and margin at the top, let's add 3. That looks way better now, and we don't have any more overload. Also, on smaller screens, let's make this center since it takes the full width. So if I do text center, and then on medium text left, this should get updated. Perfect. Moving on to the underlying paragraph, I'm going to change the color of this one since it's like a subtext. So let's do text secondary foreground using our custom colors. See how that looks like, and some padding here as well on the y-axis. Now let's add some social icons here as well as the links to showcase maybe your GitHub or your LinkedIn. And for the icons, we are going to use this package. It's called Lucid React, and we're going to install it using npm. So adding a new tab in the terminal and adding the package. So for icons, we can go to their icons menu here and browse different them. So I'm gonna start typing LinkedIn, select the icon I would like to use, and then copy JSX. So if we copy that, we can import. So we will basically copy the name. And then what we do is add an import at the top. I'm gonna remove the tags, and this would be coming from Lucid React. So same for the others. Let's do this one for email. And finally, GitHub. I tried this one. It looked like it was deprecated. I got a warning in the terminal. So instead, we're gonna go with using the Git branch. These are just the imports. Now we need to add them. And below this paragraph tag, let's create a new div container. Inside here, if we do LinkedIn, add sign, and Git branch, we'll be able to see the icons. Let's change the, direction of how these icons are being displayed. And for that, I'm gonna change the styling for the parent container. And we're gonna do display flex. Flex direction would be row, and that should change the direction, then add some space in between the flex items. That would be using gap, and margin at the top, so we have space also in between the text. Okay, this looks good, and we can apply just as we would do with other components or divs, the class name styling using Tailwind. So if we go here and we say class name equals to, so the depends on the package. So Lucid React does accept the class names for different kinds of icons. Sometimes you just define props. But here it's convenient since we're using Tailwind, and if I do text blue 400, it should change its color. So that's set to blue, and also on the hover we can make it darker so it's easier to tell that it is clickable. All right, and cursor pointer. Now it looks like a real button. Let's copy this for add sign and for the branch and change the colors. For this one, I'm going to do pink. And this one, let's do red. All right, here we have, but if we click on this, nothing will happen since we don't have links. So let's create links, and we're gonna do that by wrapping them into an A tag and add the URL where we want this link to open. So you'll replace this string with the URL to your LinkedIn profile, and other attributes that we're going to add here would be target equals to blank. What this does is that it opens the link on a new tab. So it would be convenient if they want to go back to your portfolio, your visiting users, they don't have to go look for it. So target blank and no opener, no. So let's copy this for other links as well. All right, I'm going to paste this in here. As for the email, if you want the link to directly open whatever their preference for the mail app is, then we add mail to and followed by your email address. I'll just add an example email and same thing for GitHub. And of course, it doesn't have to be this very specific. You can use other social icons from Lucid and add all different kinds of links you want to include there. Let's try it out. So if I do LinkedIn, I mean, this page doesn't exist, but it did open the link in the new tab. We are also going to add a profile picture above this where we have the name and the description. And what I'm going to be adding in this example is this image that I have generated using AI. Ideally, there's a lot of people who use Memojis, and maybe using your own actual image is better, but if it's not, you don't have a recent one, or you prefer not to use it, then you can always go with the Memoji. So what I'm going to do is inside the public folder, I am going to just drag this image here from the downloads, and all right, I'm gonna close this out and we're gonna reference that. So remember not URL, the path for it. And above our H tag, let's do image, then we add the source. And so this is a public folder, so we don't have to include that, just the name of the file for the image. PNG. So if we just save this, also alt text is required, otherwise we're gonna get a warning. It's good practice to add it. Profile picture, it will show up. So for this one, I've used ChatGPT to generate it. I believe you need a subscription to be able to generate images in the chat, and as a prompt I gave it like just a description of this like image that we are seeing here. I also have a short on my YouTube channel. I'm gonna link in the description where I use Midjourney to generate the Memoji, and I show in that short the exact prompt that I'm using. Midjourney is also a paid service. As for if you just want one-time generation of just one image and you don't want to get a plan, maybe purchasing something online is, or finding free is the best use case. Or I'm also going to add a form that maybe you can send the description of what kind of image you're looking for, and the website would send back the generated image but using AI. So yeah, let me know in the comments if that would be something useful and you think you'd use it to add the image on your website. But let's go back. This is for like a Memoji style images. So we have this, it would add an image taking up the full space. So you can see if we make it smaller, the image, it takes up the full width, so image gets pretty large, and we can change that by adding some styling so that doesn't happen. Class name, I'm going to do fixed height, so 32, and since it's a square image, I'm also going to do the same with 2. And what I want here is, instead of the square, I want it to show up in a circle. And for that, it's basically setting border radius to very high. And if we do rounded full in Tailwind, that's what it's going to do. So yeah, that looks good. And that's it for our bio section. The skills section, in the sections folder, let's create a new file and a new component. We'll name it skills.jsx. So creating the component for that, we are going to return a section. And for this one, let's do also export default skills. And what we're going to do is, above this component, I'm going to create a new array that would be named skills, and that would store like just the names of the skills in the format of a string. So then we'll just take these ones and map them out inside this section right here. And we're gonna add, before the mapping, a header that just describes what this section is about, and followed by an unordered list. So for the mapping, we take skills array, add a map function. Inside here we have a skill, also the index. And we return a list item that's going to display the skill. And for the list item, let's do key. So when we're doing mappings, every key needs to be unique. So since we're using index, it's gonna just map those numbers out. And to display that, let's add it in our app.jsx. So this is a good alternative. Instead of having to create separate list item tags for every single one of those, we have a dynamic value, and for every iteration, this value is being replaced by every element of the next element in the array. So let's add that below bio. Okay. So that's the rundown of our current state of the component. Okay, so same thing that we did for the section before the skills. Let's make this look like a card. So that would be background white, text left, rounded XL, padding set to 2. On medium, padding would be 5. Shadow medium, and also some margin, so we have space in between. Okay, that's how it's looking like. Now updating the header for this section. text large. Let's set the text color to secondary and foreground, margin bottom 3, and font this time I'll put semi-bold. For the skills, I think we can have multiple of those words on the same line, and for that let's do some styling on the parent container, first setting the display to flex, and then flex would be wrap, so that means that it would take up, it would move this, add this to the previous row until there's no more space left. And also let's increase the leading, it basically sets the line height, as you can see here, and too large because we're also going to make those words look like, put them in a pill tags. Okay, so far it's like this, and let's create a component for the pill tags. So that's our, besides the section, first I'm creating a component, and for reusability purposes, I usually create a separate folder for those, name it components. And in here we can create a new file, tag.jsx. Constant tag. So this time tag does take in a prop. Let's destructure it, and the name of the prop, we're gonna give it a name. Then we're gonna return a span that also displays that name. So this is a dynamic. We have a return statement, and we have an export default. Before we add any styling, let's import this inside the skill section. Components tag, and pass the skill to the tag using the props name. Let's save that, and we don't see the name because I did return semicolon, so it actually returns nothing. Okay, let's fix that. Now we're seeing our list and adding styling. So class name, rounded full. So for the background color, let's set that to our value for the background. So same as like this color, and some padding. We're also going to do a margin. Okay, and then on every list item, let's add the class name and margin on the right set for 2, 4, so they are not as close. I think 2 would be maybe enough. Okay, that looks better. To move on to this larger column, and we're gonna start with creating a component for the projects and displaying that. So in sections, new file, projects.jsx, and creating a component. Before I get into the code for this, I'm gonna return an empty fragment and then go back to it. Let's also do export defaults. I'm gonna close out the skills and tag and import our newly created section inside app.jsx. That would be sections and projects. Let's remove this hard-coded column text and add projects instead, and I'm also gonna remove the border. We don't actually need it. So that's should be our projects. Created an array and mapped that over, displayed it inside our skills section. We're also going to create an array in the projects component where we are going to list the projects, but this time the array elements isn't going to be a simple string. Instead, it's going to be an object with fields that contain information for every project item. So I'm going to paste the array that I created, but the way it goes is I'm going to minimize all the other elements. So first creating an array using these brackets. Then inside the array as a first element, we create an object where we add a name. So name field, and then in the string you add the name followed by a description and the text for description, as well as the URL where when users click, you want it to go to that URL, as well as the image URL. So because I have this project, for example, the first one hosted, I just copied the link for the URL where it's hosted at. But what you can also do is, as an image URL, you can also indicate the path to the project and add the images inside project logos. So I'm going to show how, and inside here, new folder. Did this 3 images inside the project logos folder, also all of them generated using AI, and then I referenced them in my image URL field. So I have 4 projects here in total that I added in the array, and for all of the projects except this one, I have a tutorial on my channel on how I built it, as well as like the GitHub links for it, so you can check out the videos for those. And this one too, I'm gonna include links of all of them in the description, so make sure to check out if you wanna build more projects for learning or for your portfolio enriching purposes. Okay, and let's get started with the project component. We're gonna add a header, let's say recent projects. I'll add a class name, so it would be a very large text, and text alignment left, as well as font bold and margin at the bottom too. Let's save that. Let's make sure that it's showing up. Now let's create a unordered list where we're gonna display our items. Projects map. So we have a project and an index. So let's first just display a name, project.name. Okay, so now for every project we are going to have, we're gonna display them using a separate component, and we're gonna create a project card component for that to handle the logic. But before we do that, let's add some styling to the parent container itself. So that would be class name, background white, text left, and the padding. Okay, that should be good. Going back to components, new file, project card. So because there's different kinds of information that we have on the project, we're gonna be accepting multiple props. So it would be the field, so name, description. Let's map them out here, URL and image URL. And we are going to return a list item. Actually, we don't need to add a list item here. We can just add a link tag and export default project card. So inside the link, I will add a div and 2 paragraphs. So first one is gonna show the name, and second one is going to display the description. So let's see that in action. Let's go back to the projects file, import project card. Scroll down, replace this with project card. So now let's pass the props. Here we have name that would equal to project name. So here the name matches the props, but let's say if this field were to have something else named, for example, title, then we would say project.title. But yeah, it does match the name. I did that on purpose, so it would be easier. Description, project description. Project URL and image. All right. Save that. So far we just have the name and descriptions show up. Continuing from this project card, adding an image. And source would equal to our image URL props. For the alt text, let's add a name and set the height to fixed value as well as width. For the class name, we're gonna add object contain too big. And in this, every single project card container, we are going to have 2 columns. So we're gonna display image, always the logo, always on the left, and then information on the right. So let's do that. That would be our A tag, I guess, responsible for that kind of styling. We're gonna set the display to flex border. Let's add some border only at the bottom. So that's the changes, and add some padding on the Y side, then padding that was at the top and the bottom, and then this is on the left and on the right, like a smaller one. For the card itself, let's add some rounded borders and also gap between these two, so we need space here. Next thing what we're gonna do is when somebody hovers over here, for example, we're gonna change the background color as well as the text inside color. But because the hover might apply just the background, we also need to change text color when technically somebody's not hovering over the text. So that's why we're going to create this group hover effect. So we're gonna name it item. And for the hover of this card itself, we're gonna update the background. And then inside the child divs, we're gonna update the hover. So background, slate, hover color, 100. And now if we hover, we see the background color change. Let's add margin at the top. So if we were to go to the name now and add some colors, so that would be on just the text, hover text primary. We would see that if we hover over the text, which is not doing, okay, so now it's changing the color. But what we want instead is when we hover over the card. So then that would work if we use this group hover feature, group hover, and then the name of which group. So it would be item slash, okay. So now we hover over here, the text color changes, no, it doesn't work. Oh, it's item, other way around, okay. Okay, and let's go back for a second in the project and wrap this in list items, list item tag, and for every list item we're going to have a unique key. So if we reload this, okay, now hovers work as expected. And let's add an icon, so it's indicator that this is a link. For the icon, we're gonna use chevron right from Lucid React. Okay, and we're gonna add it all the way on the right side. I'm gonna do another div. Okay, now we see that it, because of the flex, it shows up right after where, I guess, the middle component, so the text ends, and instead we need this pushed out all the way to the end for every single project. And to achieve that, what we're gonna do is for the second item, we're gonna stretch that to take the remaining space. So that would move this one out. And that can be done using flex grow. So on the second div, let's also make this flex direction column. And if we do flex grow, that's what's going to happen. All right. Let's add a styling for the description. I'm just going to change the color to secondary foreground. As for the name, I will do first change the size of it, text Excel, then font semi-bold. Do we already have the hover? Okay. I feel like group hover doesn't work. Oh, that's why. I had an extra. Okay. What's remaining is on our A tag, add an href URL. So if we click here, it would actually go to the URL of the project. So the next two parts that we are going to add is a contact form and also a footer. In the contact form, you can do the same thing as the email link here, where you add an email, and if someone's interested, they can contact you. As for if you're planning to add a form and send an email from that form, for that you'd be needing a domain and also some kind of server to actually send the email. You can't just do it on the browser and client side. So just something to keep in mind. As for the contact UI itself, let's add that, and also in the sections, create a new file, name it contact.jsx, new component. Let's export. And I'm gonna close out the others, add this in app file. All right, and we'll add it after it'll show up after the project. Inside the contact, let's add a section with the header, something like contact me. And we can have a subtext here, something interested in working together. Contact me at, and then the link. So I'm just adding like a testemail.com, and href would be mail to, and the email address. So it would open the mail kind of like it does here. And this would be here. Let's add the styling, starting with the H header here, text for Excel. On the left side, bold and some margin. So that's that one. And this I'll wrap in a div first. I'll add background white, text also left. Rounded XL and padding 8. So that's how it looks like so far. Moving on to the form. So just a heads up for the form, you're gonna need a server, and we're not gonna cover building a server in this tutorial. This is just for the React part, but I'll provide some solutions that you can use and show some examples if you wanna follow along. So creating the form after this paragraph, let's add that. So we're gonna have different kinds of inputs. Let's do two of them. So first one would be type text, and in the second we have a type of email. As for the message, we're gonna use text area instead of the input. So if we save this, we're gonna see two boxes here. They don't have the borders, so that's why we can't see it yet until we add some styling. Let's do placeholder that explains what the forms are about. And I misspelled it. Okay. Gonna move this. So now the text show up. Okay, doing the styling now, add a class name on both of the inputs. First, let's update the change size, make it medium. Then as a background, we're gonna set the color that we have for the background, rounded corners, some padding on the side, as well as smaller padding on top and the bottom. For the placeholder, we're gonna update the opacity, and we'll set it to 50%. So 50. Also on the focus, we don't want to display this outline, so I'm gonna do outline none. I'll add some border, and the width would be full. So one input takes up the whole space. For this one, or for the form, I'm gonna add a class name. I want to add a margin on top of this, so margin top 3. I'll also make this flex direction column and gap in between item 6. So now we're gonna update the styling of this input as well. So do the same. I can just paste that in here, and we can follow the same also for the text area. The one difference in the text area is I do want to update number of rows, so we can just use the rows prop and do 4. So it's a little bit bigger and we have more space. And now what's missing here is a button. So let's add that at the end. This would say send, and the type of the button would be submit. So once we have submit function, it triggers it. Now, so the color of button, it kind of blends in with the input. So let's change that and add a class name. Background would be primary. Text white. All right, now if I start filling in information here, we can see that it's getting updated, but we also want to capture those values. And to do that, we will create a new state. So let's import a useState hook from React. And first I'll create a initial state. So this would just be the object that will contain information that we'll be collecting. So it will be name, and by default, the initial state, everything would be empty. So we have a name, we have a message, and an email. Creating the state, let's name it form details. It would contain an object, and also set form details, that is use state, and by default it equals to our initial state. So saving this, afterwards we are going to create a function that's going to help us update the state. So constant on value change. So we're going to take in 2 arguments, the field name, that would be whether or not it's an email, message, or name, and then we'll take in the value. So if I type in this here, John, the value would be passed down in here, so that the state is then, we know what to update state to. And let's fetch the object updated form details, that equals to, so for the other values we're going to do destructuring because we want to keep the other values that are already in here, and only one that we want to update is field name. So whatever is coming in here, this is like, it would dynamically update. So if this is set to name, it would update the name. Message or email, and set it to value. Okay, and then we call the hook to actually update that and set it to our new object. Okay, so now what do we do with this function is we call it inside input. So as user starts typing, it kicks in. And for that, we use onChange, that equals to, we take the event and we call our function on value change. First argument in here, we pass a name, since that's what this input is for. And then event.target.value, that's gonna fetch the value that's entered here and save that. So then we do this as well for email, but here we call the email one, and in the text area we do message. So if I type in, the state is getting updated. Then we have a function that gets kicked off when send is pressed. And what we want to do is reset the form, right? So if we call that, if we first create that function, constant on handle submit, that equals to, we take in the event and we do event that prevent default, because if we don't do this, what's going to happen is, so I'm not calling this function yet. So if I click send and okay, test@gmail.com, you can see the page got reloaded. So that's not what we want to happen. So that's why we're calling this. That would prevent the reload. Then we can do set form details. We set that to its initial state. So it would reset all the values. We take this on handle submit, and for it to fire when send is clicked, we go to our form and we pass that as an on submit prop. Here we can also, before we clear out the state, we can console log for us just to see that all values are getting registered correctly. So if we do open the console and put name, some message, we click submit, we do see this got printed out, and that's our object. We have all the fields. Perfect. But if you notice, what didn't happen is the state did get reset. But so if we were to console log after this, we would see that it's empty. But we don't see the fields are actually being reset on the form. That's because we never passed our state to our inputs. So input doesn't know that it should use that one as a value. So we're taking input from being uncontrolled, because it stored the value by itself, to a controlled element, as we are updating its value ourselves and it's not doing it automatically. Okay, so I'll pass the value here. That would be form details.name. We have this one here. It would be email. And here we get a message. Get updated, but if I start filling it again, then it should correctly get displayed. And what I think is the best solution for sending emails from React is resend, but you can use it when you have a server, for example, when using Next.js. Here's like a code snippet, sample code that you can use to set it up. And also so if you want to take your project and convert it into Next.js, that's an option. And I do have a video where I built a portfolio in Next.js, and there's a part where I also set up this sending email functionality. But note that for resend, you also would need to still connect your domain, have a domain, set up like the routes inside the resend, and then you'll be able to send the emails, because when you're indicating from which email it should be sent the domains from, if you do just a Gmail or something else, then it's like a personal email. It's not gonna work, as you should own the domain. Yes, that's one option. Another option is if you just want to keep a React application separate and set up, not like a server, but more like a deploy a function. You can do versatile functions, and you can still use recent in it, either versal functions. Netlify also has functions, I believe. And maybe I'll make a separate video about how to create versal function and connect it to your React client app and integrate recent as well. Third option, which is what I'm going to use, is this project that I worked on a few months back. I basically built it for myself to be able to easily integrate the forms, specifically contact form, inside my projects. And the way it works is that, so this one doesn't send an email, you can observe the submissions kind of like in Typeform. Typeform has inside the dashboard. So if I were to select, I believe I did it for when I had React hook form tutorial, and you can also check that out. It will show up in the top right corner of the video. So this is the submissions that I got, and integrating API is also very simple. So you just click on add form, and for name, let's say I'll do developer portfolio tutorial, or portfolio, and then tutorial. Okay, let's create the form. It's gonna generate an endpoint, and usually it starts with this URL, API submit, and then you have unique form ID here. So I'm gonna copy that. This got copied. Go back here, and inside on handle submit, we are going to call it. So I'll do try and catch. Also turn this into an async since we are doing a fetch. So let's get constant response that equals await. We make a fetch request and we paste in the URL, and for as a body, this takes in the type form data, and we just have state here, so we kind of have to like convert it into a form data. And I'm gonna update the state after we submit the request, and constant form data that equals to new form data. So yeah, this is just a side project. I haven't made any changes since I deployed it, but if you guys have any ideas how it can be updated, maybe in the future I'll add some features. For example, when you get a new submission, you get an email, things like that. But let me know in the comments, or if in general you're planning to use it, and if not, why is that? So that's the constant form data, and then for constant, every field in the data in form details, we're gonna take that and we are gonna append it to our form data. Data.append, and it will come in as a name, and form details, we're gonna access that field. Okay, so once we have that inside this request, we define things like method. The method type of this request is post. Inside the body, we pass form data. That's just how we send the data, and content type application JSON. Okay, then we have to wait for the response. We get the result. Result equals to await response.json. Here we already know that it's been submitted, and we can update. We can examine the result, what's coming back. I just returned like a message. And we can also give users some kind of indication that their form has been submitted. So for that, let's create a new state, constant submitted, set sub by default, this would be false. We set it to true. And let's display the error message that I mentioned. So that would be above the button. If this is the case, we can display your message has been sent or something like how long they're supposed to wait until they get a reply is usually a good practice. Let's do class name, add some color to it, text. Green 600. And let's see if we need anything else here. I think that's about it. Okay, let's try it out. Okay, sent. Your message has been sent. Console log, we get an object, and okay, so that's the message we get from the API. It just says form submitted. We can now remove this extra console logs. And if we go here, so I have this new project that I just created, developer portfolio. That's the description, and I'm gonna go to the results. So I do see the submission here. So there's a few other things you can do with the form. For example, you can add like validation so that the form, maybe all the fields you want it to be required, or message you want it to be at least 5 to 10 characters. And you can do that manually by, I guess, adding another function for validation. But once your form gets more complicated, it gets harder to manage. And to make that process easier and more streamlined, also to, I guess, validate like the data types, you can use a combination of React Hook Form and Zod for validation. So React Hook Form is a package that provides some of the functionalities that I just mentioned out of the box. And if you want to check out the tutorial, it is also in my channel, and you can click the link at the top right corner of the video. To the footer, this would be very simple, just to display a text at the end of our page. So new component for this, no props, and we're gonna use the HTML tag for the footer. You can say something like your name, and then the copy sign, which we do and copy, followed by the year. You can hard code the year, or you can use the magic of the JavaScript. So that would be new date, get full year, export default footer. Let's save it. All right, and we can add that after everything, kind of. So that's the text. Let's add some styling. Mostly, I'm just gonna center it. And update the text color. All right. Now, before we deploy this, let's quickly examine and fix if there's anything we need to do in terms of mobile view. So this part, let's center this two on smaller screens. So going to back to the bio where we have, so by default, justify center, and on larger screens, justify start. So that should center that. As for the image, we can just add a margin on the sides. So that would center, but on medium screens, let's set to 0. So we'd move it back. All right. Skills is, we just need to update and have the text centered. All right, that looks good. Projects look good, as well as the contact form. Cool. Time for the deployment, and we are going to be using Vercel. You can also use GitHub Pages, but since I do a lot of Next.js projects, Vercel, I find it easier for me. And to add a project in Vercel, once you create an account, go to your dashboard, you can click add new and project, and it is connected. You can link it to your GitHub. So if you push your project to the GitHub, it should show up on this list. And let's also do that. Create a new repository. I'm gonna name this Folio. It could either be public or private. For Vercel, that doesn't make a difference. And then GitHub gives us like pretty good explanation on how to create a new repository. So we don't need this part because we already have a project. What this does is basically creates a new file. We just have to initialize. So I'm gonna open this on the side, go to terminal. So first commit. You can also go in here and say, and then we publish a branch. Let's actually, so you can see the branch name here, and you can switch the branch and set it to main instead. Once we add the origin, and you have to be also logged in from your CLI to GitHub to be able to add the origin, especially if it's a private repo, and then we do push to the origin. This is the same as what this does. Okay, if we reload this, we're gonna see that all our code is being pushed up. So that's the basic README for React plus Vite. Now let's go back to Vercel. Now we can see that this developer portfolio has loaded. It has the icon of Vite as it already has identified what the project is built with. So let's do import. Make sure if the Vercel did not do that, that the Vite is selected in the framework preset, because if something else is selected, the build might not work. So we have repository name, we have the main branch name, and if we just click deploy, this should only take less than a minute usually. Ready to check it out. I'll say continue to dashboard, and we can see the domain that used to deploy it, either click here or visit. It's going to redirect there. Now we have a domain that we can share, add the link somewhere so others can as well see your portfolio. So that's it for this more quick tutorial compared to my other videos here. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to check out the other tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.